Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Grana. I am here today with our New York City 2015 alumni, Katie Mack. And we are we're here to talk today as part of our Brave Beyond the Stage series that we've created to see where our alumni are today, where they were when they were with This Is My Brave, and kind of what's gone in between the show and today. So I'm so excited to have Katie Mack. If you have not seen her performance, I highly recommend you watch it. We'll link it on this video. But Katie, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah. First, I just want to say it makes me feel so famous to be like an alumni of this thing, and that I've watched This Is My Brave grow in such a way that I really do like I'm having my fame moment. You guys, this is that y'all are watching it. But I live in New York City. I'm an actor. I'm a personal trainer. And then like I like to do those little things like I'm a mental health advocate. I'm in recovery. And I more than anything, I'm a storyteller. Whether or not you want to sit around and listen to the story, I'm gonna tell you a story. And yeah, I think that sums it up nicely.
Yeah, and you're a pretty good storyteller, so I think
Thanks,
people
girl.
will want to listen. Yes. So really fast, what? How did you hear about This Is My Brave? So think back, almost 6 years ago. How did you hear about This Is My Brave? What made you want to audition? And what was just the whole process like for you?
It it was really lovely to start to reflect on this question because it is one of those things where like, the universe just sort of like plops something in your lap and you just go, "Yep." I'm an actor, and the hustle of the actor is to try to find work. The hustle of finding work means like looking at breakdowns and auditions. It's not for any reason. If anybody thinks that like things just happen to you, that's as an actor, that's just like super inaccurate. For most people, I don't know, maybe if you're like real cute, stuff will just happen. But most people, you got to chip away, and you got to show up. So that's some of it. And I had actually just, I think, come off a couple of medications, and I was getting back into creativity and mental health and drug use, and I mean all that stuff sort of like mixes in together. And I
Mhm.
sort of mentioned that to say that I was coming off of some medication and I was getting my sea legs again in terms of writing. Writing, I'm not like I'm not a cute journaler. I like don't write poetry that other people don't see. I think I'm like a modern day flexer. Like I used to like write Facebook poems, and I'm like, that's my poetry. Like there's nothing secret about me.
Uh,
um and I had written some plays and some short stories and some other things that had been out into the world, and I was feeling my that like those like the wires connect again. And
mhm.
then I saw the call, and
Now, okay,
yeah.
question. Were the things that you were writing before? So first of all, wait, let me back up. I have two questions then. I joked. First question, what is your diagnosis?
So I'm bipolar 1,
Okay.
and what I had but recently that has potentially been switched to borderline. So
Okay.
it really kind of depends on who you ask.
Sure.
And
Borderline
in
is
turn
so hard to like diagnose, and it's later in life. It's always like a second or third diagnosis. So, and I say
I
always
saw it.
really liberally. Sorry.
Well, no. I totally agree because I was like floored. This is so I think the thing about diagnosing these things that are sort of in between is one, prescribing the medication is like a roller coaster that anybody, if anybody's watching this, they're like doing this, oh my god, because it and it is it makes me just you the patience with it personally, and then the self advocating with it personally is so hard, and we'll
Yeah.
unpack that some more later for
Yeah.
sure. um my first diagnosis with being bipolar was when I was 14.
Okay.
Um, I honestly don't know if I was, I mean, I definitely can like read the diagnoses and be like, yeah, that's me. But like what's the difference between being like bipolar and like having like a going through a hormonal jump, and also like maybe being on like a weird birth control and like
Mhm.
having the hormones like pop up.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a doctor. Like I don't know what I'm talking about. I just know that like I felt like that diagnosis being prescribed with medication at the same time maybe didn't help.
Sure.
But that's again kind of like, we'll unpack that some more.
Right.
And then when I was diagnosed with borderline, probably about 3 years ago, it was like another whirlwind with like both feeling like relieved that I had like,
Okay.
I felt like I was seen, and at the same time, like mad that it hadn't been diagnosed sooner. But yeah, that's sort of the beginning of it.
Okay. Okay. So makes perfect sense. And you do, like, you have two different journeys, and I mean many journeys, but like you kind of like ever end cap, like your starting point and your ending point where like pre-bipolar, post-bipolar, pre-borderline, post-borderline, like.
And I continue to have that timeline because I'm
Yeah.
also like another, I say diagnosis, I think that would couple with it. I'm in recovery.
Mhm.
And so in recovery, we'll often say like dual diagnosis.
Yeah.
And that's sort of just the language, but those timelines kind of go at the same time, because this the self-medicating that I was doing in order to medicate my mental illness was absolutely, it fueled that in such a way. And then in the same way that, owning and accepting that wasn't going to happen for me, or wasn't going to help me anymore, also helped my mental illness kind of
Yes.
hug it closer and
Yeah.
keep it inside, like, keep it away and keep it at bay or manage it.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
yeah.
And so for reciprocity's sake, I just want you to know that I also live with post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and depression. So I do understand the medications, the journeys, the roller coasters, everything. So when I'm like talking about a certain mental illness, I'm not trying to just be like, oh, you, this. It's like, I really get it. So, but then, okay. So my second question was, when you were writing before This Is My Brave, and you were kind of coming back to, the world of entertainment and things like that, were you writing about your experiences of recovery and mental illness, or were you just writing again? Like, was This Is My Brave kind of was This Is My Brave different in the fact that you were actually like acknowledging your diagnosis? And I'm just asking, I'm not really sure.
No, this was definitely the first time I had written about it, especially so candidly. And I think it's because the call was so candid. It was like, we want to hear stories about mental illness and how you've dealt with mental illness, or if you know someone that is going through or dealing with a mental illness. And that it was kind of like, it wasn't like, we don't want to hear it. It doesn't say we don't want to hear a creative story, but it's like, we don't want to hear like a made up version of this. Like, we want to hear your story.
Yeah.
And that clarity allowed, me, and I think, my other castmates to like answer with clarity,
Yes.
and owning that story. And I think that was really important. And it became, a jumping off point for me to write about it so clearly. And it was really empowering. And I think before I was sort of writing about, kind of the space, like gray area spaces, like what does it mean to like, be a woman but maybe not want to be a mother? What does it mean to like, I don't know, be a drug user who also wants to help people? Or like, what are these like these gray area spaces? Because things are just not so black and white, or things are not so, oh, it looks like that, or this looks like that.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of what I had been writing up to that point. And I think I still do that. And a little bit, even with my piece, I think I wanted to do that. We think bipolar is this, and this is my experience with it. And I had written a piece basically about bipolar, me owning my bipolar diagnosis, and me owning my bipolar experience as a superpower.
I love your piece. I
Thank you.
watched it and I was like right there with you the entire time, and you're hilarious and poignant. And then I was like, it just, you did it. Everyone tells their story differently, which is like one of the coolest things about This Is My Brave, is how you can take a topic or a situation and express it in a million different ways, even if it's an essay. So yours of being like in the moment and writing it with you, writing the highs and the lows. And I love when you say that like you don't experience normal emotions, that like you get these really cool, exciting emotions. And I kind of think it's true. Like when you know really low lows, when you know the depths of lows, and everyone will experience at some point in their lives, but some people just recover more quickly from it or don't live in that on a regular basis. But when you know lows, you know highs. And the good can feel so good. And I'm also getting ahead of myself here because I do want to talk about 2020 with you. But like one of my one of my things about 2020 was like I finally remembered how to not have to be high to enjoy something. Like remember the
Oh,
little
wow.
moments that are little high, like being with my family or seeing my niece and nephew after not seeing them for 3 months or something like that. Like that it kind of re-regulated my emotions in terms of, because with anxiety and depression it's so similar to bipolar, and who knows, maybe I'll have a bipolar diagnosis one day, like, but I can be so excitable or I can be, I'm not leaving my bed for 3 days. So finding that medium, I looking back on 2020, I'm like, I actually had these moments that maybe would have stressed me out or seemed insignificant, and now I'm like, this actually matters. Like these are
You
important.
just blew my mind by saying that. I think what you just said in terms of like being able to identify that smaller moments can like count as happy.
Mhm.
And like knowing it, there's like, I think there's so much like coming into your own, but like we hear an experience, we hear happy, we hear this, or we see someone who like, meets their or hangs out with their nieces or nephews and they're incredibly happy, or they like see a dog and they like whatever, they get these like things. And a little bit I think so much of my journey, and that's like this is where I co-sign on the borderline, is me wanting to experience exactly that and being like, well, that it just goes from A to B, right? We see a puppy, we're happy, right?
Right.
And like, yes, actually with puppies that's true, but like other things are like I'm hanging out with my friends. Like I'm hanging out with my friends and like there's no nuance. And I think that's also where I read about the gray area, but that
Mhm.
I would just so often almost try to mimic some of that behavior in order to maybe incite something, but
Mhm.
it almost feels like, a kind of relearning some of these pathways, and that I think if I didn't already have a feeling, right, and I was just sort of like mimicking behavior,
Mhm.
then maybe I'm like more psychotic. And I actually don't mean that in a like crazy, like in a bad way. I
Right.
sort of mean like in like a diagnosis way.
Right.
But like I would have a feeling, I'd be like, well, that feeling's not right. I should feel and behave like this feeling because I've been
Yeah.
told this is what I should be feeling. And this, like, it's my birthday, I should be happy, I think would be like a
Mhm.
really clear one. And where
Yes.
it's like so nuanced, or it's so multifaceted. You
Mhm.
can both, and then like the end result for me is like, I can both feel happy and have all these great experiences, and I can mourn a loss, I can be sad about
Yeah.
something. And then for you to sort of say, like, it doesn't even have to be big, and have this feeling of being like, oh yeah, this is like content would be like a nice
Yes.
word.
Yes.
Like, what does
Uh-huh.
that feel like? Content. Because also, if you've had the highs and the lows, if someone says, oh, like, did you have a good time? And you're like, well, I've had a good time. I know what great feels like. Great feels like this. And
Right.
it was like not even good, because good is this.
Yes.
So maybe it was like, okay. Whereas like other people would be like, that was really fun.
Uh-huh.
And understanding that actually really fun, not even like you're not even acting like something, but really fun might just be like more mellow.
Exactly. Exactly.
I
Yeah.
like love what
Getting
you said
being
about realizing that.
yeah, like things can just be so, and my therapist tells me this all the time. Like you're so black and white. You're so like one or the other. And it's like
Hmm.
incorporating into that gray area, which so I love that you brought up and that you talk about. And even like in your piece of just like there's a whole world right now of okay, so I'm gonna say
Ooh,
something first. Oh no, you go.
yes.
You go.
No, I sorry, in a little bit of the hesitation, I like something
Yes,
popped up for me, and
go.
you had sort of asked why I wrote it, and I was reflecting on the piece. And again, this is like, oh, like art is weird and stuff is weird and anything that comes out of you is weird. Babies including are weird. They're all weird. But I had realized something because I was coming to terms with my I had my diagnosis, but coming to terms with myself and whatever. And I think I wrote the piece being like, coming from the negative point of being like, how can somebody love somebody like me? Which I think is like a pretty universal feeling, especially when we're feeling awful.
Mhm.
And I was in a relationship that was functioning. And functioning in some ways and in a really high way, and functioning not in some other ways. And in hindsight, there's like so much to, so many reasons for it, and so many, a culture that him and I had created. But that's kind of neither here nor there. And I just sort of was like in this like point of being like, oh, poor me, poor me, poor me. God, no one could love me. Why would anyone love me? And I had this person who did love me. And I thought, well, like, there must be some benefits. Like, there's got to be something.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, like if you're bipolar, like you might have like a really high sex drive, and that like, and it was like something I was like sort of looking at. I was like, oh yeah, that could like relate, and that could be attractive. Like maybe not even relating with me, but just like, what are the things that are like, that could be positive?
Yeah.
If you're bipolar, like you want to have like a really good time. Like you're with somebody who like wants to create an event of something, and like, and trying to like unpack the positive things while also coming out of the negative. So like, I was thinking like, there's no reason why anyone should love me. But if someone were to, what would be the things they might love about me? So I think that was the reason for writing the piece, because I couldn't deny my existence, that I did have someone love me, no matter how hard I tried often. I don't know, anyone who's watching this probably is like, you shouldn't love me. It's gotta be.
Well, and I'm sitting here going, yes, I know. Push them all away.
I'm gonna push you away, and then I'm gonna yell at you for not being too close to me. I'm
Yes,
gonna blame you for
because you stopped talking to me.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yep. Hashtag identify, girl. Identify. But yeah, I think that's what the piece came from. So I wanted to emphasize that, because it didn't come from even a manic moment of me being like, being bipolar is great. It came from, that real sad part, that real lonely part. And then just, that glimmer, then like a little crack in the door.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's a great way to honor your story. And give, like, we always, it's so funny when people start out with "This is my Brave," where they're like, how am I supposed to tell my story in 5 to 7 minutes? I have a million things to talk about. And it's like, yes, but the more that you pick a moment and you refine it and refine it and refine it, your message is going to be heard far louder than it would have if you told us every terrible thing that happened to you and every way you tried to overcome it. So the fact that you were able to take this like moment in time and then tell it to the audience, where even I feel seen, where I'm like, oh, I do that in relationships sometimes. I'm like, oh God, dating. Oh God, like I haven't had to worry about that since the pandemic started. And like, oh God, what am I, like all of these things, but also how often we tell ourselves we're unlovable because we have a diagnosis. So it's so relatable, but then it also shows people that aren't living with mental illness the thoughts that go through our heads and like what this diagnosis and this label can do to you. So I never want to not tell someone, like, I'm not against telling people that I live with mental illness, but sometimes it can be so scary. I mean, it is scary. Like, I guess with practice, I've gotten used to it where I'm not as like uncomfortable with it anymore, but like, God, what are they going to think? Or is everything I do going to come back to my mental illness or something like that, but that's what we do. So
I so hear that. I so hear that. I mean, and I still struggle with it even after writing a piece. I mean, in the piece I had written like, so This Is My Brave is like a big conference and everyone there is in support of it. And I sort of said like no one came to this event thinking that they're going to find their partner. Cause we're all looking at each other, like sitting in the audience, like that guy's probably, he's depressed. Man, she's dealing with some psychosis. She says post-traumatic, like whatever, like,
right.
Like where these aren't, but at the end of the day, actually like more people deal with this than not. And then where do you put it in? I mean, that is a big question. And, it's really interesting because sort of my bigger identifier is that I am in recovery and I'm sober and I am a drug user through and through and an addict through and through. And because of the style of dating, I almost always have to lead with it. If I was dating right now, I'm in a wonderful relationship with a man who totally gets it He's trying to get it. He gets. But the idea of being like, there were times where I was dating and how do you everyone's like, do you want to go out for a drink? And you're like, oh, I don't drink. And then they don't respond.
Yeah.
Cause that's like, wait, you want to get to know me over coffee?
It's what you say in your piece about like, okay, Cupid, like you don't put in your profile, your dating profile, like as bipolar. And sometimes I'm like, I kind of want to, like, I kind of want to put, but then, oh God, I don't even need to go down that road. But yes, like navigating how and when you tell someone, but you're in a place where that is one of the first things that might come up, and you can avoid it to a certain extent, but then you're going to have to voice it at some point because we live in a world consumed with alcohol. So there's that. So when you did your Brave piece, were you sober at that time also? Like you'd gone?
I was.
Okay.
Yeah. I was sober at that time and then relapsed and then, went back out and, did more amazingly wonderful things under the influence and just, I grew up, I'm now 34. When I first went into the rooms, I was like 25. And when I say into the rooms, I'm referring to AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, and NA, Narcotics Anonymous. And everyone was like, oh, you're so young. That's so cool. You're so young. And like now people don't say that shit to me. No one says that. No one's like, just stay. Just stay here.
I thought so. I'm 33 and I thought about that recently too. I'm like, when did I go from being like the adult young like the old soul to being like, oh, it's you now. Like that's just where you are.
It's like it's the like where are those people that are talking about those moments, right? That's just it's time. I don't know. In 10 years, we're gonna have this conversation again. Like we were so cute and young. Right. It's hard, man. It is hard to sort of be like, I thought I was getting older when I was 25. I'm now 34. I'm turning 35. It's a whole.
Yeah. I hear you.
We're in our mid 30s. You're kind of mid 30s. I'm in my mid 30s. Mm-hmm. That's like weird. And then all the expectations that should come with that, but that's also another thing.
Okay, so what is there anything like that, like post Brave, or I mean, like you can talk about you can tell me if you want to talk about your post Brave experience and or like where are you now? We can go to all of these things.
Well, I quickly would just love to say that Brave for me, it was really special. In a way that I can't quite articulate, but in the only way I'm able to say it is that I knew I had never experienced a sense of community like that before. Mm-hmm. And that the way that I know it was special is because I had never been in a place that made me feel so comfortable before. I was talking with your coworker, Erin, about my experience and I had sort of said, there are scenes that are like written into like Silver Linings Playbook where they're like everyone like sort of references anyone who's ever had a mental health moment in their life or like I've seen Silver Linings Playbook, so like I understand. And you're like, yeah. But that moment where they're sitting at the table talking about medication, I mean, we're all sitting there. I'm laughing about the time I put Seroquel up my nose because I'm a drug addict and I, found pills around and just would pop them and whatever to have that experience. But of course the Seroquel was mine from like X amount, and Seroquel is often prescribed for bipolar. Mm-hmm. And how it like stuffed up my nose and I couldn't breathe out of my nose for like 5 days. And like, it's one thing to like tell that story on like a bad first date, mm-hmm. or tell that story to like my friends who don't have issues either with drugs or mental health. It's another thing to tell that story with a bunch of people who are like, no, yeah, right? No, like they totally get it.
Yeah, like
and to have it.
It's a secret club that no one wants to be a part of, but then you're so happy to have found it.
I don't know if I had ever felt so uplifted. And I have been performing for a long time. I got into performing around 21. I think I did Brave around 28 or 29, just a little bit of a timeline. And I only say that to say, like, I'm not new to performing. It was scarier. I'd never so directly done a piece that was about me in almost it's an essay form, but it's a little performative. It's not quite spoken word or anything. That would be way too cool for me. But it lives in that space a little bit. Yeah, it's monologue-ish, and I've done that kind of stuff. But you'll see if when you watch the video, I'm a little nervous. You can tell I'm a little nervous. I was with just these people who just had my back, and we have that is the thing. We've had one rehearsal. We all meet each other. We all look very different. We all look so different. The ages are completely different. And I just remember, and we're in this and our performance was to a massive crowd. It was like a lot of people were there, or it felt like a lot of people were there. I don't know. Maybe I make up stuff. I am crazy.
No, I think you guys did a pretty big show. I don't.
Yeah, and it felt massive. And we're sitting back in the rehearsal, and we're all just like laughing about our experiences. I mean, I like think about the people that were in the show with, and it was special. And I've been in a lot of shows, and that's not to say that like other shows I weren't special. Sorry, y'all. But it was like nothing else I had ever done. And I distinctly remember walking out. It was like in the 60s, and then if you're in New York City, it's on the east side. Walking across like Central Park on that day, it was like October or something. And no jacket, and just flying, like feeling not like the high that I have when I'm manic, where I'm like shaky and like whatever. It's just like that content feeling.
Yeah.
Really content. And like it lasted and it stuck. And I actually truly think if anybody from Brave reached out to me for any reason, like I would do anything like for them. I mean, it just really was so special. So I know you didn't even ask me about that, but
no,
it's so, as a performer, as somebody who has done this, as somebody who does this, it was really special to me. And then I got a chance to do it one other time at a high school with Lauren. But
good.
It was just amazing. But I will say, that like you don't know where life is going to take you, but you kind of just take the next right action. And I had gotten so much positive encouragement from like the people I had done the show with. And it's just right in line with me. And it comes from me that if you watch the This Is My Brave performance, and then you listen to my newest creation, which is a narrative podcast, it's almost like a radio play called Fucking Sober. The style is very much the same, sort of like how I tell the story is very much the same. So like, I would love to say that like I've grown a lot and my storytelling has changed a lot, and I'm like a better everything, but really it's like the same person, right? Like, I don't know. So I have a particular style of speaking and talking and emphasizing, and it's all the same. But this podcast really explores recovery and getting sober and being newly sober, and it deals specifically with alcohol versus with drugs. But I can directly say, and it was like an epiphany moment for me, especially when I was unpacking stuff with Aaron, that those two things are connected. I don't know if I would have come to Fucking Sober had I not been encouraged to tell this very specific story with This Is My Brave. So I just think that's so cool.
I love that. And I love your podcast. Okay. So I've only listened to the first 2 episodes so far.
Great.
Like,
get it.
Oh my God. Also, so over the weekend I watched, on New Year's Day, I watched Brittany Runs a Marathon. And over the weekend I watched Modern Love. And so both are based in New York. And have you watched Modern Love?
Yeah.
Okay. So like the 3rd episode where Anne Hathaway is playing the bipolar character. And so not only I walked away wanting to style my tiny little house like a New York apartment. Like I'm determined to redecorate it so it can look like a New York apartment. But also I was just like, this is all so incredible. Like these storytelling and your podcast and the way that you speak and tell this story. And so are these, okay, I know you have a character, Anita, on your podcast. Are these your stories though? Are they?
So my middle name is Anita.
Oh.
So okay. It's not like far-fetched. That's the secret. That's like the inside of secret. Also, I sort of a joke I had done before is like Anita Drake is her name, and it's Anita Drank. So that was sort of the in. A lot of times, like as an artist, having like a pseudonym, we see it all the time with like writing, but having a pseudonym gives you some freedom.
Sure.
When you're telling such a very specific story, I get to sort of claim it's like 70-30 or 80-20. So like, and I not just claim, it gives me the freedom. So I can actually talk about Anita, not as myself. And then I can be like, what, that really happened? Because sometimes what really happened actually doesn't make for a good story. And so,
Exactly. That you have some
yeah,
creative freedom in there to
yeah, yeah,
make it funnier, make it softer or whatever it is that you
exactly.
do for that. So it makes perfect
And
sense.
it
And you
honors,
hide it well in the, I even like reading
thanks, girl.
the podcast description. I'm like, I mean, I think this is her story, but like, if I didn't know or didn't even have the opportunity to sit and talk to you, I'd be like, is this girl just writing this? Because I feel it, but like, so it's great. It's a great, contrast
It's
to how you do it.
some of the decision to do it is I have like no problem being like, I want to make it as easy as possible for people to find me, to know who the creator is. They want to like double check stuff, but I because, and it is specifically like, especially in this world, we have to sort of like look at the stories we are telling and who's telling the stories. I want to be as clear as possible that this is a white presenting heterosexual female. That is me.
Yes.
And that, and what
That
happens when, this story, you sort of know who that is, but maybe that like, it's not so clear what her experience is, or how she's being presented, or in the world, and that maybe not kind of being forced to sort of see her, you can like still hear your story in it. So like for me, my story with like my first meeting in AA, I was 24 and I watched a man who was probably like 25 years my senior, definitely a different skin color, definitely a different experience, about 30 years of sobriety, like tell a story that I could identify with so strongly. And I didn't want sort of with the nature of podcasting being the medium to listen, not being bombarded kind of with having to be like, oh, it's this girl, she looks like this, she's, I don't know, has big brown eyes, and that is why she's having this experience. It's more just like hear the stories and take the ride, and if you identify, you identify.
Yeah.
And then the coolest thing for us is that season 2, we really, I knew making season 1 that I wanted to make season 2. I knew that season 1 had to be my story so that we could tell somebody else's story, and that recovery will be in a different body, and that different anybody can recover, and can recover, and the resources available, like, maybe vary and maybe differ, but that's sort of the overarching message is often the same, and so our season 2 just has a very different representation, after we've sort of like made this little space in the world. But yeah, that was really important to me. And if you go, like, if you're in the recovery community, or if you're in like a sort of experience stuff online that way, there's a lot of people who look like me, who present like me, who are recovering and thriving. And so we want to make sure that we continue to push the narrative that anybody can recover, but it might be a slightly different journey. And then we hear that, and that representation happens. I just had to go first. So yeah, that's kind of that.
That's awesome. I mean, it makes perfect sense to me. And like having the anonymity of being a podcast, of not being like something that you're watching, you can take anything you want, how you want or need it. And even and like you just use, like, you're so witty, your humor is so good, and your timing is so good. And then like, but then it's like everyone's regular fears of AA, of like the basement meetings with the coffee and things like that. But you're like, I did it. I did it, and I do it, or whatever it is. Like, and it just helps break down those barriers that we come in all shapes and sizes, no matter what you're recovering from, like whether it's mental illness or addiction or whatever it is, whatever you're addicted to, like that. It's all over the place. So it's really, I can't wait to listen to the rest of it. So
thank you. And I so appreciate you saying that. And I think like, right, like this, the formula and format for Fucking Sober is the first 90 days. And what does the first 90 days of, sobriety look like? excuse me, in AA, the newcomer kind of really helps, is always going to be the most important person in the room. And I think that actually translates to a lot of things. Like, if I've been on a medication for my mental illness for a while and someone's on it first or coming off of a medication, just understanding, because I've been through it, I know it, I understand it. I'm so much more empathetic to their journey. And then I'm also more vigilant of my journey.
Yes.
So like when a friend reaches out to me because they're coming off of Seroquel and they're having a hard time, or they're like excited about, and if anyone's taken Seroquel before, they've gained weight. I'm just gonna let y'all know that's the side effect of so much of this stuff, and it's real frustrating. So if you're, coming off of it, or coming off of like, well, and like having headaches or whatever, all these sort of side effects. But that it makes me more vigilant about my journey again to come off of a medication, or to not just do something cold turkey. That like anybody who's going through a tough time is during the transition time, and there's nothing more transitionatory, that's a word, between actively using and trying not to use anymore. So I think that's some of the lesson there too. But that the way in which we do that, it actually can run the gamut. Like, so this particular story for season 1 for Anita, she gets sober and she has the experience of AA, and I just wanted anybody who like might be wondering what it's like, maybe have like a more specific reference, because it's not how everybody else experiences it. It's not how everyone, but it's like my experience. It's Anita's experience. And if that's helpful, that's cool. But I just don't want everyone's reference to only be like a meeting and Fight Club or whatever. Right. I'm like, the 4 or 5 references that we see.
Maybe can you imagine stories, though, if like everyone documented their first 90 days and like put it on a podcast, like no one would feel alone. Like, if everyone in that meeting would go tell their story of their 90 days, it would be like, oh, we can do this, but people don't. So that's like, we need you. And maybe it will inspire someone else one day to take a similar journey like you, or reach out to you and be like, can I tell my story through your podcast? Whatever it is that you've got an open path in front of you right now of what you're even opening up.
I think it's very cool. And the storytelling, and this sort of, piggybacks on This Is My Brave too. I have always had a very non-traditional life. I've had a bunch of privileges given to me. And some of the privileges have, I would say that some of my dealing with mental illness and dealing with drug addiction led me on this non-traditional path. And so the non-traditional path allows me to be non-traditional and be vocal about this kind of stuff, and sort of choose my pathway. It's so much more risky for someone who's like so confined in a box. And so I love the idea that, potentially telling my story makes someone not feel alone and could maybe encourage them to tell the story, but that, who knows, maybe like I'll totally be canceled one day because I have like a mental illness, or because I like told this story. But basically I just like keep myself in circles with people who understand it and who get it. And that the storytelling aspect of it, I do think that like the overarching theme is that like people just feel like really othered and really alone and really, and then the ultimate goal for all of that, when I'm feeling that alone, has always been to like remove myself in some way, either to disappear through a drug, or alcohol, or, I've had strong suicidal ideations in my past, if not also suicidal attempts, that would take me off the planet if I hadn't, gotten the help that I needed. And so that's kind of the ultimate goal, I guess, like, to sort of help people not just feel so lonely, and then maybe encourage them to tell their story, or even if it is in the version of just like, 2 friends who are hanging out who just feel a little more encouraged to be like, yeah, actually I had a hard time today.
Yeah. We talk about that sometimes when we're like, it takes a certain person, and like you said, like life circumstances as well, like, which unfortunately I hate having to say this, but that people would be worried about their jobs, like their professional life or something, if they told their story on the Brave stage with the face and the name. But we talk about that, like Jen, Aaron, and I, of like how the Brave stage doesn't have to be your stage. Your stage could be your therapist's couch, or your friend's kitchen table, or like whatever it is that you need to have these conversations that you can share your Brave, and or your struggles, whatever it is, to that the stage can be whatever you make it, but that we have to keep.
I love that.
So
I that is so powerful to me. I was having this conversation with my girlfriend last night about how she had gone to therapy before she'd been going to therapy for years before she ever went to recovery. And
mhm,
she said she basically got a therapist so she could say she had a therapist, but would never talk about her
uh-huh,
issues. So like one assumes that if you have a therapist that like,
yep,
oh, okay, like that's self-care, girl, like I'm doing the work. But like, no, you're not doing the work just because you like pay someone money or like your insurance pays someone money.
right,
You have to feel comfortable enough or even like it's an option to bring up. And that
yeah,
I love the idea of that, like these stories can actually expand you in private spaces,
yes,
can like have you come up like me owning the fact that I'm bipolar gives me tools and words and language to communicate to, I don't know, even like, my boyfriend or
mhm,
communicate to my clients. Like, I don't have to shy away from those kind of things. And I can dumb down a conversation or I can, really unpack a conversation, but that like I have the language and the tools to be able to do that. That's huge in the
yes.
private spaces. I love that.
Yes, that, will this is my Brave will always be a public entity of names and faces together so that you see that it looks like that mental illness and addiction look like all of us, but that if you're not ready for that point, that doesn't mean you can't share your Brave. It's, where
Oh,
you're writing a blog post or something like that. So, um,
I love that.
and that just reminded me also though of, or like this conversation of how it's so to our audience that's probably so lovingly watching this conversation right now. Before we started, Jen and Aaron, before we started talking, I told Katie that I immediately loved her just when I saw her name because her last name Mack is like my favorite bar, and it's right down the street, like walking distance from my house, and that's like my little like local watering hole. So like I knew that I was gonna like her, but also that I am doing dry January right now. So we talked about this and I was like, we can talk about it now or later, but I needed you to know this important point. So to that, what do you think about dry January?
It's so interesting. Like, right. I've been doing like, I'm 34. So some people are like, she old and some people are like, she young, but, like the fact that dry January is a thing is so cool.
Hmm.
To sort of take, it's basically like, for me, I sort of think of holidays all this way too. You sort of like, it's not because if you, I mean, that might be to like, if it's religiously inclined, that's kind of like a different day why you do another thing, but it's basically like a moment in time or a day or 2 days or 3 days, which you can honor X, Y, and Z. You can be grateful to be with your family. You can take time off, you can take space. And I
Hmm.
just like the idea of like going at your life, being like, what happens? It's like as an experiment, what
Hmm.
happens if I pull this out?
Yeah.
What happens if I just take this out? And it can be very clarifying. And you have to, I think, doing dry January, sort of prepare yourself. You have to be open that it might like pull up some shit for you. But
Yeah.
I think that also happens a lot. Like, I'm planning on quitting my job. I'm planning on starting a new job. I'm planning on, I'm getting into a relationship. Like
Hmm.
sometimes these like imposed things I think can open up space, can
Yeah.
open up realizations. And like our journey is like, or your journey, my journey, whatever, it's those journeys are like only yours. You're the only one on it, right?
Hmm.
Like as much as I feel connected and think my best friend and I are like literally have the same brain,
Hmm.
like this is my own journey. And then any information I have about myself to give myself tools to make myself successful, to own my own happiness, is going to be helpful. And I think dry January's, there's I love that you're doing dry January. I like high five you so hard. I think it's so super cool. And I'm like excited to hear how it goes for you.
Yeah.
There's a big difference for me between dry January and being in recovery.
Absolutely.
One can lead to the other, but
Yes.
I can't drink casually. I mean, I've done it.
Yeah.
Or it looks like I did it, but I can't.
Yeah.
Um, and so I just, for me, it's sort of, I love that society has created the space for it to be normal.
I agree.
And one of my girlfriends and the same girl I was talking with last night, she started her sober journey in dry January because she knew that she wouldn't have any questions asked.
Mm-hmm.
I like
Right.
love that. It was like so smart. I mean,
It's
she's like
true.
really smart in so many ways, but the idea of just being like, I think this is the thing I want to do.
Mhm.
There's a term for it in the community called sober curious. What is sober
I've heard that.
curious look
Mhm.
like? And I think, right, because like I think sometimes labels can give us power, and just as much as they give us power, sometimes they can take away power. But if it is empowering to say right now, I'm like, I'm sober curious and seeing what it's like.
Mhm.
Or a lot of times the recovery community, like, a community can be just as accepting, or it can be loving and accepting, and sometimes it can also be othering without meaning to be, or
Mhm.
while meaning to be. So sometimes people who don't use or don't drink, might smoke marijuana, or do some sort of psychedelic drugs in order to
Mhm.
like kind of help their own brain chemistry. And there are some people in the recovery community that just like would totally frown upon that. um, I'm just a big believer in happiness.
Right?
Whatever
Like
makes you happy.
mhm.
Yeah.
Do what is going
And
to bring you peace.
I think also like understanding how you identify yourself is
Mhm.
huge. That also like this is like me getting my soapbox, but a lot of times that happens. I think with sexuality, someone's like, oh, she's this, she just doesn't know it yet, or oh, he's this, he doesn't know it yet. It's like, no, he identifies as heterosexual now. He's heterosexual.
Yeah, right.
Or she identifies as non-binary, like, or sorry, I would say they identify as non-binary, that they're non-binary.
Yeah.
Like, that's just like, let people
Yeah, like,
decide
does it
what it is.
really affect your day-to-day life? Like, does
It
it
has nothing to do with you.
really?
Yeah.
No,
Or
it
your gossip, right?
yeah,
Like, I mean,
exactly.
it's
It's
like
just
very uninteresting. Like,
yeah.
it's like, and in the same way that I think for me, and I've gone through different phases of like, owning my mental health and being like, yes, I'm bipolar and this feels good and I don't mind talking about it
Uh-huh.
because I actually know what it means to me, and I don't know what it means to you, but I'm going to try to like put a face with it.
Mhm.
And the same way I do that with recovery, but it gives me a little bit of a shield. Like,
Yeah.
I have it in the world. Um, I think dry January is like putting on a name tag and being like, for this month, like, this is how I identify. And then how
That's
does
it.
it change your behavior? And
Yeah.
I really, all of what we do is we're playing dress up. As adults, we're all playing dress up. Yeah.
Trying on
And
something
if
new
you,
every day and you're like,
yes,
does this
yeah, why
work?
you want to do the same
No.
thing?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I
yeah.
mean, even last week, I turned down going to dinner at my favorite bar, the Mac, because I knew I wouldn't be able to come home sober. So I was like, no, I can't. Can we switch locations? And that was even I was like, oh,
I
my
love
heart
that.
hurts a little bit. Like, oh God. But then I had a great dinner and I didn't wake up hungover and I didn't like, and I enjoyed the company, everything, not like the next day where I'm like, oh, I have a meeting and oh, I can't like all of it. So this also
That's
leads
so
me
cool. But
to,
it's so
oh,
cool
go.
that you did that. And no, I want to, like, I mean, for me,
Mhm.
it's not, you have an association with drinking at the Met, because the Met's super cool and it's a good hang, you feel
Yeah.
comfortable, right?
Can't wait for the
Um,
nurse to watch this either. Just kidding. I love it.
do you guys need a face? She's sober. Um,
Yeah.
but that it like you already set a boundary, like the practice of setting a boundary.
Mhm.
Like, you're like, I'm going to be honest with myself. If I go to this place, I'm going to have a drink,
Yeah.
or it's just illuminating to know that, like, oh, if I go to this place, I have a drink, like chicken or the egg. Do I want a drink? Well, I don't, like, I mean, all those, like, those things that it's like so higher level. Like, you were like, I don't want to drink. I'm not going to kid myself. I'm going to advocate for myself. And it's going to kind of be not a big deal. And the result is that, like, I did it. It doesn't have to be life changing.
Yeah. Yeah. But it was like
It's
at
just
that
like,
moment.
I did it.
And
Yeah.
there
I
was
have a
no
sober
pushback.
reference.
There was no
Yeah.
like, Katie, you love the Mac. Katie, you want, it was like, okay, cool. Let's go to this other place then. Like, well, totally fine. I was like, okay, cool.
And
But
how amazing to have that experience of realizing how simple it was. That's
yeah,
so cool.
right. We can build things up so much in our minds.
Oh my God. Hmm.
The like chaotic, terrible situations like we're facing, and I mean that sarcastically. Like we make everything terrible and
Oh yeah.
otherly and disappointing.
Answering this email is like, I'm sweating,
Right.
what are we, just say yes. Or we just say, I'll see you then, whatever.
Right. Yeah. So, but we imagine these outcomes and then it's like, oh, okay. And then when it is not what you wanted, then you're still prepared to whatever. But so I spent a lot of 2020 drinking because It was a
You and many
yes.
many people.
So that had a big reasoning for me of like, I need to learn how to like regroup and cope with life right now because this
You're a
is
genius.
working. And so, yeah, like I gotta get on my A game because like I was in a reactive state and everything for, the majority of last year. And now it's like, all right, now it's time to be proactive again and like actually take care of myself. So,
I'm
um,
so impressed with you. That's so cool. I mean, I thought like as someone in recovery I get on virtual AA meetings. I'm part of these virtual groups. So, well, I mean, it's so part of my world that it's like nothing now,
yeah,
right? And like you can create that. And my friend had a quote the other day that said, I mean, all my friends are so smart. He said, when you're feeling lonely or you want to be a part of something, like if you want to have a community, you have to be in the community. Like if you are feeling like, oh, I want that over there, like you have to go be in it.
yeah,
And I'm in the
love that.
community, in the recovery community and online, right? Like, what does that mean? But like, and like, I'm in the recovery community in terms of like how I choose my relationships.
Mhm.
And that was huge for me in order to do that. And so it's so interesting for me to like be part of my world, have that be part of my world and then be and then some of my friends drink and
Uh-huh.
drug and whatever, and it's totally fine. And I'm like, there's kind of token sober friend, which is totally cool. But there's like intersectional meme, which is my whole point. I'm getting to memes. Was like if you're still having happy hour at 2 o'clock this far into the pandemic, maybe you should readjust.
Mhm.
And it's just it was like something about that is so clear. The idea of being like, what's the line between self-care or enjoyment and going
Yes.
overboard in
Yes.
these and a little bit it's easier with alcohol, especially if you're in recovery. You can be like, I don't drink. I do drink, I don't drink, fine. But like, what about exercise? Like, what's
Mhm.
the line between like that as being self-care and now you're like beating yourself and punishing yourself, or you're not having a healthy relationship?
Yes.
Food, codependent relationships. Like,
Yes.
what is that line? And it doesn't necessarily look a certain way. You sort of
Mhm.
just have to like weigh it yourself. And I brought that up to just be like, a lot of times we reach a point where we're like, I can't kid myself into thinking that this is not unhealthy anymore.
Right.
Like it's becoming obvious and apparent.
Right.
And like you can be someone like me who like was falling asleep on the train, like drunk all the time, picking
Mhm.
fights with people, get putting my life kind of like in danger,
Yeah,
feeling incredibly suicidal. But also you don't have to get to that point.
exactly.
And that's specifically with drugs and alcohol. But that all these things, like, this thing isn't, I mean, my favorite question is like, is this thing serving you? And
Yeah.
like alcohol, you're like, it's not serving me anymore for right
Right.
now. That
Right.
doesn't mean I have
Like
to
it's
like put it
filling a
away forever, but it's
void.
not serving me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
filling
Yeah.
a
I'm going to get
void
clear with
with
it.
it became, yeah, self-medication and things like that. And it was like ultimately, like I will never, I mean, this was probably like 7 or 8 years ago. Which my journey with mental illness started in 2010. So probably around 2013 something. I finally had a therapist say to me, well, you know how you kind of like grow through therapists, like the different
Oh,
purposes that they serve and
oh yeah.
purposes. So I finally had gotten off of my like coddling therapist and knew that like I needed to go like be active again. And I was crying and sobbing in this first introduction appointment with this therapist. But I was just like, I'm lost. I don't know what to do anymore. And she just grabbed my hand and she said, do you know you don't have to live like this? And I was
Oh,
like, what? Like, no one has ever said that to me before. So that's
I'm
what
going
I
to cry.
think now often when I'm going through something. Like if I'm in some kind of state of mind that I know I'm out of whack, I'm like, do I want to keep living like this? And if I say no, then I need to do something about it.
To
Whether
have
it's as much as a new
the,
therapist or exercising more or like whatever it is, ending a relationship, like if I'm having that thought, then it's time to move. It's time to act.
I mean, to have that sentence be the thing that sort of like pulls you into a thing, is, that's going to benefit you for the rest of your life. And then you'll even find an even clearer sentence.
Right.
it's funny because I'm an actor, and so I mean, I think sort of the stereotypes of actors is that they pull from their experiences, and I can say that I do, and it's, you know, very much, I'm not like, uh it often just mirrors something, but a lot of times a sentence like that can pull you into the kind of empathetic track of a character.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you know what it's like to feel hopeless? Do you know what it's like to have that moment of being like, oh, I don't have to do this anymore? Like, what
Yeah.
does that do? Right? Like
Yeah.
it already your body changes, or, you know,
Mm-hmm.
your movement starts to change, or the way you start to speak changes just from these questions. And, you know, my acting coach is really, really good at sort of finding those questions,
Mm-hmm.
but they can get so clear for you, both in like performative artist acting world, but in real life too, of being like, I, again, what you just said, I don't have to live like this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Or do you even know that there's an option? Do you
Yes.
even know that there's an option? That's
Right.
crazy.
Right.
And the answer
Like,
was like, no, I didn't. And now
yeah.
I do. And now
Yeah.
what do I
Like
do?
I was really like, no, no, no. I thought this was my life now. Like I thought
Oh,
it
I
was
so get that. I so get that.
from
It
here on
like
out.
pulls me right back to like when things were so hot for me. Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's like so wild to think that, like, of course I still deal with my, right now, even with my bipolar swings, I sort of use them, I use them to try to benefit my life as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I chart my swings. I put notes on my phone. As someone who, right, is artistically inclined, when I'm manic,
Mm-hmm.
like, instead of being like, oh no, I'm manic, I'm like, well, I guess I'm about to be productive for 3 days. Like, I'm
Right.
about to
Right.
get
Gotta
shit
get
done.
variety.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna get stuff is gonna come out of me. I'm gonna honor this. I might
Yeah.
even cancel some other stuff so I can get this done, because in 3 days I'm gonna be useless.
Mm-hmm.
Like, right, like it's now like a superpower.
Yeah.
And also,
I
like,
love
and
that.
I the more that I'm here on this planet and talking with people, it's like, oh, you're productive every day the same amount? No, of course you're not.
No,
Like,
right.
everybody's like, like there's got to be a little bit of this stuff in
Uh-huh.
everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Like, people get it. Like, people, that's why people need their Saturdays and Sundays, or sort of traditionally, so they can recharge. Um, Everyone needs time to recharge. Everyone needs time to reset. And not everyone's as productive as they want to be, or
Yeah.
as, you know, and so understanding, and again, like, it's like so many things. As soon as I feel like I sort of have hacked my mental illness, like something else will pop up,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or like, I'll
Yeah.
go into therapy and they'll like bring up some trauma, and I'm like, oh no,
Yeah. You're like, I wasn't
oh no.
really ready to go there right now, but I guess, but you
Mm-mm.
have to make the conscious choice to them. Like that's also the thing about therapy is like, you know, when like you've had a hard therapy session that you're like, shit, it was so good. It's like the workout that hurts so bad. Like it hurts so good. You're like, oh, I didn't have
I'm
to.
laughing because I'll go through therapy sessions, and then I just for like 5 minutes I'll go for a walk, and it's just mm, mm, mm. I'll often cry. I don't I will cry during therapy sessions, but I will cry after therapy sessions. It's like
Yeah.
reading a good book.
Yes.
Oh, it's a mess. It's a
Mhm.
mess. But
Okay.
I think that's also how sometimes I know that, yeah, that we're pulling up stuff at the right
Yeah.
time. And also there are times which I've sort of practiced too, you know, uh, making boundaries with what we talk about, with what I can
Mhm.
handle. And, you know, also deferring to like, hey, maybe I don't want to talk about this because maybe I should, or
Yeah.
whatever, and, you know, gauging that, you know,
Yes.
something feels too hot for me.
Mhm.
So maybe we should take it out with, you know, pot holders,
Yeah.
but we may not be able to do that today. Maybe not today.
Exactly. Exactly. I
And
mean, I
advocating for that has been quite a
it's
journey for me.
it's so important and like knowing where your conversations are, like assessing where you are with your therapist. Like have the conversations run dry? Do you feel like you're like
Never.
like checking in and it's like, hey, I'm good, like small talk, like no, then get a new therapist, like, or say, like express yourself, tell them that you need something more. Like I started 2020
Oh,
trying to do more trauma therapy because I was like,
mm.
I'm in a good place. I'm working for this is my Brave. I can go inside and like do these things that I need to address. And then the pandemic hit and I was like, whoa, 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 I got to go back to like reaction therapy. Like I need to like word vomit each week and like try to process what's happening and put that trauma aside for a little bit, because I can still function with it there. I just know I'll function better down the road without it. But
I call it being on
life
fire.
still happens.
I say, to my therapist, I'm like, I'm on fire today. So we're going to deal with we
Yeah,
need to put the
I
fire
like
out.
that.
And that it's, and this is also a bigger conversation about our healthcare system, but learning how to advocate and learning how to communicate for what you need is like huge. And my journey with that has been so strong because I just have always defaulted to other people. I've let other people decide so many things for me.
Mhm.
Even when my intuition, was like telling me something else, I just had decided I wasn't sure. And it's hard. Like if you're mentally ill, like your sense of reality, I'll put reality in quotes for everybody, just to be fair, your sense of reality is really skewed.
Yeah.
And so I really like, I'm, I like have people in my corner to sort of help me check what's real.
Yeah.
Right. So like, I have a therapist to be like, hey man, like, I don't know if I should be this angry, like what is real? Or, hey man, like, I don't really know if this situation is I should be dealing with this as quickly as I need to be, or as I feel like I need to be. Like what is real sometimes gets skewed. And so how do you advocate for yourself if you're not sure what is real?
Mhm.
And so putting those people in place that you can trust, I think is really important, and sort of making sure that they're pillars for you is great. And then you can sort of,
Mhm.
yeah, I'd like sort of like sonic radar off these people, and then I can like go advocate for myself. But it takes work, and the idea that I'm going to advocate for myself when I'm in a low is like impossible.
Exactly.
If chewing is too hard and I
Mhm.
don't have these pillar in place,
Yep.
like I have to put these things in place before, and it's the worst. It's like, it's so unfair.
It is.
It makes me so angry to think about it. That like some irresponsible person, like, I don't know, my parents, the world, the system has let me become an adult without these things in place. And now I have to go figure them out. Like, I'm mad at everybody. I'm mad at everybody.
Yeah.
But once you do it, I mean, I sort of say, you gotta, when you're not on fire is the time where you have to do the work, and it's still hard, and it's boring, and it sucks, and there's too many phone calls, and you have to interview too many people, and you have to trust your gut. And even if you have a skewed sense of reality, you just have to and then you have to pivot. And then when you grow, you have to pivot again. It's like, there's so much work. It's so much work. It's never ending.
As soon as you feel like you hit an okay, my best friend and I always talk about this too, is we're like, I'll be like, why do we have to be so self-aware and awakened? Like, because you're like, oh, I'm flowing and I'm good. And then you're like, oh, but there's this. And then you go down that road and you're like, why did I do that? Like, I just chose to go down that road. And
oh God, that is so real. And a little bit right now with the world that's going on now, we see the results of people who are consciously choosing not to go down that road.
Exactly.
And so sometimes you're like, why did I do this? And you're like, oh yeah, so I'm not kidding myself, and I'm not that person. I'm not making excuses for my language. I'm not like pretending that I'm one way. I'm not like, you are doing the work to confront all the things about yourself is only going to help you. It's only going to help you. So just do it. But yeah, it can be frustrating. And I think the motivation is to just keep being away from the people who willful ignorance. It's embarrassing, man. It's embarrassing. Don't embarrass yourself. Like go figure who you're out, like who you are out.
Right. I won't blame,
even if you're messed up.
Like, just go do the work, please. Everyone's entitled to do their own work, but like,
yeah, it's there for you to do.
Get off my watch doing it. Like,
yeah.
Can you go?
I won't police you as you're doing it, but like, come back to me when you've done it. Cause like right now I can't even communicate.
Right. I can't at all. Oh my God. Okay. So I don't know how we just talked through probably over an hour.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah.
We're
amazing.
I've totally enjoyed this conversation. And
thank you. Me too.
I mean, is there anything else that you want were there any other like hot points that you want to, like, Katie Mack wants to say this to the huge, this is my Brave audience. Anything about 2020, anything about Brave, anything about your podcast, because it's awesome. And I can't wait to go listen to it again.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll start with the podcast because that's the easiest one. Go listen to Fucking Sober. It's F***CKING soberpodcast.com. You can find us on Instagram at FCKING sober 90 _ podcast. whatever. We'll find links. You'll figure it out. I'm Katie Mack. That's the pitch. I'm learning how to do that. Like I said, you got to advocate for yourself. But I really do think that I would like to piggyback on what I said, which is just that like the journey that you're going through, kind of dealing with your own mental health, advocating for your own mental health, discovering what it is, kind of getting a diagnosis, all that stuff is like really hard. It's really hard. It takes a lot of work, and it can feel like you just really want someone to help you and advocate for you, and hopefully you'll have someone in your corner. But I think I just want to validate and say, like, it is as hard as you think it is, and it takes as much work as you think it does, times two, and it sucks. And I think that there's a system, and it's a little bit soapbox, but like I encourage you, like, let's all bypass that system, because like there is a superpower underneath there, right? Like the only reason I've become a little bit more illuminated to this, the only reason why, my mental health, or my bipolar diagnosis like combats with society is because society has like done this thing and I'm different than it. But like that doesn't make me any worse, right? Just because I function really wonderful between like 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. And other people work from like 9 to 5 doesn't make me weird. I'm not weird.
You're not
like,
no, you're not less than anyone else. I have to remind myself that, like, I'm not, we are literally all equals.
And that, I guess there should be some sort of like maybe norm, I guess, but really it's just, they're all options. It's all an option. Yeah. And that I think you have to hack the system and figure out what works best for you. And it takes work and it'll keep changing, but that it's like so rewarding. And that it really is, I think, like when we talk about like how to figure out what makes you happy, it's that like self-care doesn't have to be a bubble bath, that self-care doesn't have to be like a cookie or a glass of wine. Like self-care is what makes you happy. And actually like your intuition, like you're not crazy, you'll figure that out. Like if knitting, you find that like, happy place, that's great. If going, whatever, like it takes work to come up with it, but that you'll know when you found it, not because you Instagrammed about it, not because you saw it on a list, like you'll feel it. And like, it is worth that journey, because that feeling is like no other. That feeling is the thing that's going to keep you here. That feeling is going to be reinforcing. And once you do it once, you'll do it again and again and again and again and again. And that like the presentation of what that looks like may be very different. So I think that's what I would like to leave with, that like it's a fucking fight, but like it's worth it. And that it may not look like anybody else's. And I definitely think I'm living proof of that my life and my journey is just so non-traditional, as my mother would say, in a loving way. And I'm like happy. I mean, I really am happy. I have like a life. I really do have a life beyond my wildest dreams. And it's great. I mean, right now, like talk to me in like 24 hours. We'll see what happens. But right now, it feels that way.
Oh, I love it. And I think we have to be realistic about that too, though. Like we can be really, again, what we were saying earlier, you can be happy with your life and still go through hard times, but we do have to keep pushing. We do have to keep advocating. And I mean, for ourselves, it starts with us. Like I can't advocate for anyone else until I can advocate for myself. So like going down that road and doing what your self-care looks like, whether that's therapy, whether that's laying in your bed for a day, like whether whatever it is, but also knowing that it has to move you forward. So
yes. Oh,
you got to go with
it. You put it so much better than me. That's exactly it though.
Took everything that you said and just
thank you. No, those words are great.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for having this conversation with me today.
I love This Is My Brave so much. I think it's so important and so cool. And it's so streamlined, like we are talking about mental health. We are all people that have dealt with it. And I'm so grateful that you guys are here.
Thank you for being a storyteller with us and doing this and just being a part of the Brave family. You're the best.